We'll make a start. Okay, welcome everyone to this one of the last sessions of the conference. My name is Janice Powles. I head up Sustainability, Climate and Carbon in the City of Edinburgh Council. I also chair the Cities Alliance Sustainability Action Team. The focus of this session is really very much on the role of cities and that role, what that role means in terms of moving to a low carbon economy and the kind of transition. So we're trying to focus on the challenges and the barriers around the role of cities in this agenda. We have a mix of representatives on our panel today from both government and from private sector. And I'd like to extend a warm welcome to our visitors from Munich who've joined us for this session. And that's Dana Vogel and our colleague Julia, who's in the audience there at the front. So a warm welcome to you for coming along today and hopefully maybe explaining a bit about the work in Munich. The objectives for the session, I'm going to ask the panel members just to introduce themselves and just to say a little bit about the work they do and maybe how that fits into the city's agenda. It might not, but any kind of links that they feel they'd want to make. So just a few minutes from each. And then we'll move into some questions for the panel. And then I'd like to open that out to the floor. And I really would encourage you to make contributions to this. I think it's very much, we're all in this together, all the different kind of stakeholders. So please, if there's points that you'd like to make. There will be microphones that will be roving around. And if you could just wait for that, if you do have a question, so that we can pick that up. We have now 55 minutes, I've been informed, so I will be keeping us to time and we'll just see how this goes. Hopefully we can get through some of the issues. So without further ado, I'll ask each member of the panel just to introduce themselves and just say a little bit about the work that they do and maybe how it links. And maybe just start at the end.
Thank you, Janice. I'm Nathan Good. I head up Grant Thornton's Energy, Environment and Sustainability team. And what that means I do in practice is lead a team of people who are providing advice, financial and commercial advice to a wide range of clients doing or trying to do or thinking about doing projects in the low carbon space, and it's as broad and as long as that. And about 3 years ago, I started to get interested in cities and how cities could act as a catalyst for delivering programs of projects, because whilst on the one hand there was a lot of attention going on some of the big ticket stuff like the offshore wind sector and so on, there was a huge and growing agenda around making cities more environmentally friendly and but something broader than that, and that was about making cities sustainable for the long term. So starting to think, what does your city want to look like in 50 years' time? We did some research, and I wrote a report on that was published about a year ago. And I guess in the intervening 12 months since then, what I've started to see is some real movement in terms of the UK cities beginning to grab this agenda and move it away from something that just says we have a part to play in reducing CO2 emissions globally, which is fine and is obviously a key part of that, to a much more broadly based agenda, which is trying to say cities are going to be the growth engines and the core functionality, if you like, for countries going forward across the globe. How do we make our city become sustainable for the long term? And then I think in more recent times, over the last 12 months, just beginning to see some action both at strategic level. So we had the agenda for cities in December. We also had the city deals in England at the same time. And it's very interesting to compare and contrast those, and maybe we'll get an opportunity to do that later on. But also some underlying projects, and I was really pleased to see when this came through in terms of narrative description for what was this session about, and it has 4 bullet points. It basically says project identification, funding, supply chain development, and winning hearts and minds. So there's a really, really practical set of questions around how do we actually get this stuff delivered.
Okay, thanks, Nathan.
Thank you very much, Janice. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Jan Falconer. I'm the Manager of Projects, Partnerships and Funding for Aberdeen City Council. Prior to this, I was actually the strategist for sustainable development for 4 years, working on the policies and really looking internally as to where Aberdeen would be as contributing to reducing carbon. Since 1996, Aberdeen City Council has actually been committed to reducing carbon emissions and put their first strategy out to do so in 2000. So it's an old culture in our organisation, and we do have cross-party support. We always have, because they've identified this as extremely important. In my post as Manager of Projects, Partnerships and Funding, I get the great privilege to work in Europe, because the funding element is looking at projects and having them funded through European Interreg projects as well as through FP7 projects. And I would say that to be relevant to this topic, our major projects that we have undertaken have been in policy. For example, sustainable urban fringes, looking at how our urban fringes can contribute to not only the economy but by reducing carbon emissions and creating a sense of place and a sense of use. From Build with Care, where we've looked at the policy of low carbon build, but not just for building new but retrofitting. And of course the city has benefited from this through the development of Marshall College and having a biomass boiler and being connected to our district heating that we do have in the city. And why I mention these particular projects is we have benefited from transnational learning. So it hasn't just been the learning that we have in our own city, but from cities in Europe and in the UK. But funding doesn't stop there. Funding means projects and it means partnerships. And we have had some wonderful partnerships, and we have wonderful partnerships. And in this particular topic, I would say our key partnership is a core organisation to Aberdeen City Council. They deliver our renewables work with the supply chain, doing that transformation from oil and gas into renewables, and that would be the Aberdeen Renewable Energy Group, who you would see as one of the sponsors of this Congress that we're having at the minute. Now, where Aberdeen Renewable Energy Group comes in, they work outside of the council, although they're doing that work with us, and they're working with organisations like CGEC and organisations like Vattenfall and Technip. And it was through their work and the work of CGEC that Aberdeen and the Aberdeen City region has this opportunity with the European Offshore Wind Development Centre. That becomes a crucial piece of infrastructure for the future, not only just as a test area, but as an area where people can see renewable energy for themselves. They don't have to go into the countryside, they don't have to go to Denmark, they don't have to fly in a plane and look down and into the North Sea. They can see it. But more than that, if we do get the opportunity, we have a very interesting project again, hydrogen buses, green hydrogen buses, and we need green hydrogen. For the beginning of our project, when this starts, we shall be using green hydrogen, but it will be from small-scale renewables. The future would be sometime in the future when the European Offshore Wind Development Centre is on track, we could use some of their fuel. That's what my job is all about. And part of it is winning the hearts and minds of businesses, seeing that they understand where their role could be in the supply chain. They realise that this is not just a different part to the engineering they may be doing, but this is a part of the work that they may be able to do for future generations, because that's what sustainability is all about. It's about a real life and a real life choice. And I suppose I've got just 5 things.
Okay, I'm going to...
Just 5 things, okay, that I just would want to reinforce. We've got to take a long-term view, both financially and policy. We've got to create awareness We've got to introduce technology with political will, and people have to champion these solutions.
Okay, thank you, Jan. Very comprehensive. Okay, Dana?
Thank you very much, first of all, for the invitation to be here. It's really, really great to be back in Edinburgh and here in Scotland to hear about the targets that have been set and the great ambitions that exist. And maybe some of you don't know it, but Munich and Edinburgh are actually twin cities, so there's a special relationship there, and also one of the reasons why we're here, but also, of course, because of the climate change action that Munich is taking at the moment. I come from a company called Sustainable. We are a Munich-based consultancy firm on sustainability issues with a specialization in climate change. And we've been involved with the Munich City Council in their integrated climate change program, and they took us on board to evaluate the past project that they established in 2010, and that's been running till 2012. So this was the first round. So we were helping them to look at what measures were successful, how much carbon was saved, and at what stage are the various projects, and also for the next round looking at the suggestions that have been made for new projects to see what was the prognosis on savings for them, and also what additional benefits do these projects bring to the citizens of Munich. So in the first package there were 55 measures that have been implemented, and now in the second round we had about 38 of them were continuations from the previous program, and now the political wheels are in motion to see which of the measures will be carried out. Okay. So I won't go into much more detail at this point, but I'm sure it will come up in the discussions, and when we talk a bit more, if there are questions about specific topics, then I'll go into more detail.
Thanks, Dana. Okay, turning to this side.
I'm Kathleen Robertson. I work for the Scottish Government Energy and Climate Change Directorate, and I head up our Energy Efficiency and Low Carbon Economy Unit, a name which has to be shortened. We primarily focus, as you would expect, on energy efficiency, both domestic and non-domestic. We provide the sponsorship for the advice and support services across Scotland, which are delivered for us through EST on the domestic side and Carbon Trust on the business and public sector side. We have oversight of a number of sources of finance, the Central Energy Efficiency Fund and Salix Loans Funds, which local authorities, NHS and FEHE institutions can benefit from in the public sector in Scotland. Our small business loan scheme, these are all energy efficiency funds, which small business loan scheme which EST manage on our behalf. We lead on the delivery of the Green Deal in Scotland. Clearly we have a lot of partners across government in that, but we take the forward lead in that. In terms of low carbon economy, a bit more widely, we've been working quite a lot in the non-renewable side, because clearly we have a big energy division within the government, and environmental clean technologies, water, waste, recycling and environmental monitoring are the areas of interest that we've been involved in over the last couple of years, working closely with partners. In terms of the cities, I've involved with Janice on the sustainability subgroup, and in the initial setting up of the City Alliance, we provided specifically through our minister some of the funding for the £7 million fund, 2 million of which came from our side of the government, to really put a focus on the sustainability and low carbon issues, which is clearly a cross issue across all the themes of the Alliance. That's probably enough.
Okay, thanks, Kathy. Andrew?
Yeah, I'm Andrew Unsworth. I work for the Scottish Cities Alliance, and the Alliance is quite a unique new type of organisation in Scotland. It brings together the 7 leaders and Deputy First Minister really to look at the city's agenda in some detail. And really the focus of the Cities Alliance is to look at how cities can be the engine of growth for Scotland's economy, really fitting in with the agenda that Nathan talked us through earlier. There's 4 themes to our work: looking at the connected city, looking at sustainable cities, knowledge cities, and cultural and vibrant cities. And that sounds a really wide agenda. It's something which in our first few months of working together, we're trying to work out what the priorities and initial priorities of action between the cities should be. So we have some initial priorities where teams are starting to collaborate together on, and one of those is the Green Deal. We have just started some work to look at how the cities are going to look at the Green Deal themselves, but also how they could work together in terms of looking at some of the scale and opportunities around the Green Deal. We're doing some work around digital connectivity and, again, looking at both the digital infrastructure in cities, but also how we can get SMEs and citizens participating in connectivity. Smart ticketing is one of the key opportunities that we're looking at, but also city investment. So there's some work looking at new approaches to financing. There's a close eye being taken to the work on city deals down in England, and how we can work more creatively at bringing finance to new infrastructure solutions which are going to be required in cities. We're also collaborating together as cities on inward investment opportunities and looking at whether we can create a common suite working alongside Scottish Enterprise of opportunities which we can go out both domestically and to international markets. And then what I will say is the work programme will evolve. So our latest working is that the cities are all very interested in the innovative work happening in Aberdeen around hydrogen. So we're starting to look at how that work could be applied across the Scottish cities and what opportunities could be. So I think collaboration is going to be really important. If you look at Scotland's cities and total up the population, we're actually just of the scale of Greater Manchester. So we do need to work together to have the international scale in terms of looking at some of the solutions. But all of Scotland's cities are uniquely different as well and have really unique opportunities. So our role as an alliance is to look at where the strengths are in each of the cities, where the opportunities for collaboration are, and to see if we can get some energy into moving a whole range of agendas forward for the leaders and for Scotland as a whole.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. Maybe just to add to what Andrew was outlining there in terms of the work of the Cities Alliance, the Sustainability Group in particular that I chair basically has three priorities that it's looking at currently. And that's been agreed across the 7 Scottish cities of looking at heat mapping and actually using the Scottish Government's new refined tool to enable us to really look at heat loads across our cities. And I think that potentially gives us a very, very useful tool for future development opportunities. You know, what do we put where? So heat mapping is one. District heating, and I think the issue of renewable heat has been identified as a priority for the cities. And we're trying to look at district heating and to develop up specific project proposals that would be very much of the nature that Andrew's referred to about collaboration. And I think the key thing out of the Cities Alliance is this has to be something of benefit for all 7 cities. It can't just be for one of the bigger cities. It has to be something across the board that all 7 cities can see a benefit in. And the third area, again, just to provide you with an update on this, is street lighting. There are issues across street lighting across all the 7 cities, and that's considered as an asset, one of our corporate assets. So street lighting and looking at energy efficiency in that, but also trying to think outside the box. I think a key thing of the work is about innovation. You know, what else can we use street columns for apart from lighting? You know, we really have to start to think about transformation and about innovation. So that's just by way of update on the work of the sustainability team, just to add to the outline that Andrew's given you on the work of the Cities Alliance. And I think if there were any questions that you might have, maybe contact Andrew, if that's okay, if there's anything specifically on the Cities Alliance. Okay, moving into the kind of question session. I think certainly with my very big sustainability hat on, I mean, there are loads of reports that come across my desk, loads of information, websites, you name it, all about the theory behind the sustainable city and what we should be doing. But I think there's issues around how you move that theory into practice. And I think Nathan referred to the moving into practical projects. They need to actually maybe stop talking about it and actually getting on and doing this. And I think one question that seems to come out of that is maybe asking the panel what you feel are still those kinds of issues around that moving away from theory and moving into practical implementation. And maybe I could just start back, Nathan, with yourself. Sure. And maybe just work our way around again. That's okay.
Just sort of very quickly, really, key challenges, and you know, we do talk about challenges. I think there are huge opportunities as well. So we just need to make sure that we don't get too kind of bogged down in the apparent obstacles, because if we do, we're never going to move this forward. This is not an easy agenda to push forward, but we have to do it, and there are ways of doing it. So we've got to kind of keep very much focused on that. For me, you probably expect me to say this: getting the partnering model right is absolutely critical, and an effective form of engagement that creates a level of trust between the key stakeholders, both public and private, is something that a lot of people are working towards in this sector, but I don't think anybody's really nailed it yet. I think it's a peculiarly British thing in a way. I mean, it'd be interesting to get Dana's perspective on this, because we have a quite a fragmented governance structure generally in the UK. So in some senses, we're trying to piece things back together again that we, for different reasons, dismantled previously. We have a legacy of PFI and PPP, which actually I think brings positive learning points, as well as you know, some of the negative associations with that model as well. But creating that space which enables people to contribute resources and money and other skills and capabilities in a way that works for the benefit of the project and the city is a critical driver. I'll maybe stop there. I mean, there are various others, but I'll perhaps hand over to...
Okay, thanks, Nathan. John?
Definitely getting the right people at the right time around the table. That's a big challenge, in knowing who the right people are. But once you do get them around the table and you have got the right people there, there's sometimes a disconnect between what you need to do and what the rules require. So if you're doing a project, you've got your project plan, it's all looking good, and you think, yes, I can do this, but red tape gets in the way. Even if you're the planning authority, you still have to go through the planning processes. So it's matching expectation with actual delivery. It can be a real challenge. And it's also, while you're doing all that, bringing people with you, because there's got to be a lot of trust there, and sometimes it's trust, but sometimes it's faith, and sometimes it's a little bit of desperation that will happen in there, and you have to balance that so well. Also, you can get so enthusiastic about what you might be wanting to do that you realise partway through, is it going to stack up for a business case? Because what I'm talking about is not actually doing the project. I'm talking about thinking about it and planning it. It's so that you can take it to the people who may fund you, who may finance you, who may support you. Those are all the things you have to do before you even get to funding. And that's the big part, funding. Because is it a priority? Will it meet the business case? Will it meet what the financiers and what your capital people within your own organisations would expect for a robust business case? And I even haven't started doing the project yet.
Okay, thanks, John. Dana?
Yeah, on a first level, of course, there has to be the commitment and clear targets, because without that, there's no direction for you to move. So I think this is something important for the for the cities to set, and then start just doing some projects as a way of examples, best case practices, and show that it's really possible. And you also in that way create a demand for sustainable technologies and solutions in that way when you first start making projects. And also when you look at the leverage that you have as a council compared to the emissions of a city, it's relatively small. I mean, when we were looking at the projects that we were doing and the emissions of the city, 3% were kind of under the direct control of cities, and 45% were in the private sector. About 30% was in households, and 20-something was transport. So really the kind of the leverage you have as a council is in incentivizing others to start moving into projects, but they're not going to start if you're sitting back and not doing anything. So you have to first start with doing some projects, and then incentivize others to follow you in that path.
Mm-hmm. So you feel it's kind of building that momentum. You know, the idea of starting small, but exactly. Actually it leads to bigger things, seems to be from the Munich experience. Yeah, taking the first steps. And I mean, Munich has been involved in various climate action activities, but it's only in 2010 with the kind of leadership of Hepp Monatseder, the deputy mayor, that they set up this integrated climate change program that we are now looking at. And it has 8 different fields of action, from efficiency in public and private buildings, transport and mobility, but also communication to the public to get started. And on the question of governance structures, for Munich, the biggest impact on the footprint of the city is the initiative of the SWM, or the SWM, which is the utility company in Munich, which is wholly owned by the municipality. So it hasn't been sold, and through them the biggest reductions can be realized. Okay, very envious of that one. Okay, Kathy.
I think one of the challenges is not availability of investment and funding, because clearly there's a lot and there's an appetite for funding and there's a lot of different pots, but I think one challenge is actually understanding what those pots of funding are and being able to bring them together into a package to fund a project. And another challenge in relation to that for the cities and other local authorities is actually going beyond what you would normally go for in terms of your own funding and trying to expand that out to make a bigger project. And I think there's a great opportunity in what the City Alliance is looking at, or, in collaborating on that kind of level and scale. The other thing around targets, whereas clearly the government set very leading targets, and we talk about them all the time, and First Minister's up talking about all the time. I don't think. And I know that cities do have targets and they are working towards them, but I think just talking about that much more and talking about that collaboratively and making it really clear what the targets are at that, once it comes down from the Scottish level, that would be something else that I think that's not clear still in terms of driving that agenda.
Okay, thanks, Kathy. Andrew?
I think the rest of the panel have covered many of the points I'd make, and I think one I'm going to add is from my background, which is really in the software industry. And we talk about something called the hype cycle for technologies within the software industry, which is a period of time from when a new technology arrives on the scene. There's a natural instinct that hype leads to a sort of peak of expectation about what this technology will deliver. And then as people learn and a few people adopt that, we turn to a trough of disillusionment. How is this going to really work in practice, and how we're going to make it happen? And then we move to a stage of real productivity where individuals and organisations start to gain real value from that new innovation and new technologies. And actually what I think we need to do in Scotland, and we need to do in Scotland cities, is find systems where we can make that process as least painful and as quick as possible with some of this stuff. And I think the way we can do that is through collaboration and learning. But I would emphasise the points of the other people in the panel have made, which is this will happen with very strong leadership and also by us thinking innovatively about how we access finance as well.
Okay. I mean, I'm wondering is there any kind of observations from the floor or comments? I mean, please feel free. Yes, David.
David Scrimgeour. I'm also based in Munich. Hello, Dana. The background, as Dana can explain, is the target which Munich has to be 100% renewable electricity by 2025, to be the first city in the world with a population over 1 million with that achievement. Perhaps Dana could say a little more about how that target came about, and are they on track to achieve it?
Okay, sure. So the SWN, as I explained, is owned by the city of Munich, and as David just said, it's the aim is to be 100% green electricity by 2025. And until 2015, they want to cover all households. And the focus in Munich is on hydro energy. I mean, there's a long tradition of hydro energy there through the river Isar that flows through it. And there's also a couple of biomass plants that we have there. But all the energy that we would need to produce to cover all the households cannot be covered in Munich alone. So the SWM is also looking at investing in wind energy across in the north of Germany, but also some projects in Spain. And what they're also looking at, which is quite exciting, is the extension of the district heating network that we have. Currently we have around 800 kilometers of district heating. It's one of the largest in Europe, and we have we're fortunate enough to have a geothermal trove or a molasse basin underneath the city of Munich, which produces hot water of 80 to 140 degrees, which is about 2,000 to 3,000 meters below the earth. And they are drilling at the moment at 16 sites to see where best to tap that potential. There's actually also one power plant already existing, and there the aim is also to cover all of the district heating through the geothermal energy that they have there. And again, this measure is making the biggest contribution for Munich to reach their target of reducing per capita emissions by 50% by 2030 compared to 1990 levels.
Okay. Can I ask, maybe just Chair's prerogative really, but if the municipality of Munich didn't own the energy company, how difficult would this be?
Well, you would rely very much on the vision of the companies there. I mean, you can see the diversity in energy companies that we have in Germany. Some clearly see the opportunities ahead, and others dig their heels into the ground and would like to run the other way. So, I mean, it's great, and also the SWM has. I mean, it's not just the pressure from the city of Munich that is making them do these investments. It's a vision that they have for themselves, and I think that's also very important for it to be successful in the long run.
Okay, thanks, Dana. Any other points? Yes?
Sorry, Bruce Wilson from the Scottish Wildlife Trust. How much of a role is reducing the actual demand for electricity playing in the plan? So reducing the actual need for, if you reduce the amount you need in the first place, obviously it's going to be easier to meet your targets.
Okay, who'd like to kick off? Kathy?
I think it plays a very big role in it, and it doesn't get talked about enough. And it was quite, I was heartened that this year the conference keynote speakers all mentioned the other part of the low carbon revolution and transition to low carbon economy, which is around energy efficiency, district heating, water, waste, recycling, and focusing in on reducing the demand is a really important area. And we got some clear direction from the Secretary of State as well that that's a clear area of interest for them at a UK level. And I think we are pushing away maybe a bit under the radar in terms of energy efficiency in Scotland, and I think we really do need to raise it up the agenda and talk about it a bit more, but there is actually quite a lot happening. And it helps with our energy requirements, so clearly it makes it easier to meet the targets. It also helps with our security, but primarily the biggest driver is it helps with the cost for the individual and for the businesses, and that's the real driver for it to maintain and mitigate those costs.
Okay. Any other kind of comments from anyone?
Well, I guess from my point of view, I think energy efficiency, just to echo what Kathleen was saying, was for quite a while a bit of a Cinderella sector, and that's changing now. Mm-hmm. I think it's coming up the agenda very, very rapidly. I think Scotland genuinely does have a real opportunity to take a leadership in this. It's not currently visibly taking leadership in this, but there's plenty of, there is time for that position to reverse very, very quickly, because the whole agenda has a very large number of different stakeholders operating at different levels, and I think Scotland generally has the ability to plug those stakeholders together more effectively than perhaps parts of England. So it's all there and all there to play for, and I think the next couple of years are going to be really interesting. Okay, I think there was another question. Yes, gentleman.
Hi, James Simpson from the Scottish Manufacturing Advisory Service. Taking sort of manufacturing side and putting it towards a city concept, we very much try and tell our companies if it's not measured, it can't be managed. Now we're talking about electricity and energy saving, but do the cities actually know what their carbon generation is in terms of population, waste, construction materials, not necessarily energy usage, to then send a clear message what we're currently at, to then deliver a target and report on that?
Okay, I'll maybe turn to Jan, and maybe I could add that just from the local authority perspective. But Jan?
There's two parts that we look at. First of all, ourselves as a major player, because in most cities your local authority will be one of the major players, one of the major users of carbon. It is our role to dispose of household biodegradable waste, and we also use the road network. So we do know ourselves, but we actually do now, thanks to good information that we're getting from DEC, we are aware, but it's not on our radar all the time, but we are aware of what's happening in business, what's happening with non-domestic waste that's collected by private firms, and we are aware of the emissions that goes through DEC. Are we doing the work that would be totally desirable so we could bring everybody on board? I think that there are groups like for small businesses, you've got the Federation of Small Business, you've got the Carbon Trust. For households, locally we've got Save Cash, and it's called SCARF, Save Cash and Reduce Fuel. There are all these other organisations that are doing a wonderful job trying to help people reduce it. Could we as a City Council in Aberdeen be doing it better? Yes, we could be. Do we have the human resources to do it at the moment? I would say no, because we're too busy doing our own job, and that's why we try our best to deploy resources where we can whether it's working with businesses to set up alternatives, whether it's working with bus companies to help them, like the hydrogen bus, and like also the dual fuel buses, working with bus companies so they can find different modes for modal shift, or whether it's working with new companies to set up car clubs. But could we be doing more? Yes, we could. Are there other organisations doing it? Yes, there are.
Okay. I mean, just to add to what Jan was saying, it's a bit of a mixed bag. I mean, there's no mandatory requirement on local authorities to report on sustainability. That's not there. We're not required to do it. And it tends to be, if we're not required to do it, we tend not to do it, you know, because it's about what's required under legislation. However, we do report on waste. As Jan said, that's municipal only. There is no real aggregation of construction waste, certainly figures for Scotland-wide that we're aware of. So the figures you get for waste tend to be municipal. There might be some traded waste in there if the councils are reporting on that. If they provide that service, they will have that kind of data. On the carbon side, as Jan said, we do tend to use DEC for the data. It tends to extrapolate Scotland from UK-wide data and breaks that down on a sectoral basis. So you'll get domestic consumption information and the other kind of sectors, transport, etc. It's quite broad brush though, and I think there are issues around the data, the quality of the data, and ultimately the reporting. And I think you're quite right. If you can't measure it, how do you manage it? That is an issue for us still. So hope that's answered it. Yes, question there. Oh, sorry. I will come back to you, Dana. I'm not sorry.
I was really heartened to hear the selection of your priorities of the heat mapping, district heating and street lighting. When you're selling it to the public or your colleagues, will you also be able to sell the savings, the financial savings, certainly from the lighting issue, but also the jobs for doing the replacement of existing lights, so that it isn't just a carbon commitment, it's actually a much bigger package, so that you get more people signing up to seeing the value of the whole thing?
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Helen. Yes, I mean, on the street lighting side, we are working with Scottish Futures Trust, and the information from some of their work suggests there are considerable savings to be made, certainly on street lighting. And I think this is a key hook, certainly for local authorities in the current climate. How can we save on resources? And perhaps as a clever way then of maybe using some of that savings to maybe reinvest in further resource efficiency type projects. So I think the key messages are, I think you're absolutely right, it's very important. If we can show that we're saving financially as well as saving the planet, then I think people are maybe more likely to buy into a message that's about saving in their pocket and ultimately creating jobs, which is a key objective of the Cities Alliance work. So we're very clear that we want to make that link between economic opportunities. Sorry, I'd like to bring Dana back in just on the measurement side and maybe ask, from Munich's perspective, do you measure your carbon emissions, and maybe say a few words about that?
Sure. Munich has actually been monitoring their emissions since around 1996, or like the late 90s. And recently in 2011, they've introduced a new monitoring system or software that is now used across Germany by many municipalities and cities called Ecoregion, which is also recognized by the Convent of Mayors, and it allows cities to input their own data, but also use national averages, and this way you ensure that you're using the same kind of system boundaries for making your, like establishing your carbon footprint, and the same kind of emission factors when you calculate. And I think this is also a really important point to see. This is also what we see when we're working with businesses. Determining clear system boundaries and being clear on what you compare city between city is really important. I think it's a great opportunity with your alliance that you can really set those standards and move kind of on the same ground and have the same ideas.
Yeah. Okay.
Just from a Scottish Government perspective, and it's not actually in my area, so I don't know the detail, but whilst there's no mandatory reporting under the Climate Change Act. It is very much encouraged, and there is a dialogue with public bodies, not just local authorities, to come into a common form of reporting and try and develop that for the same reasons, to try and get people to use something that's comparable. But having sat next to me and said it's not mandatory, so you shouldn't have done, so maybe come back on you at some point.
That's fine. Yeah, absolutely.
I think the only other thing that only other way, and it's not mandatory, but all the local authorities in Scotland have signed up to the climate change commitment, and annually we report. But it's not mandatory, and we report on what we want to report. But most of it will be aligned to our carbon management plans anyway. So yes, you can spot the difference, and you can see that there are different priorities. But that's the nature of local authorities. Each local authority will have different priorities.
Okay, any other? Yep, over this side.
I'm Dominic Sims, University of Strathclyde. I'm not quite sure whether I'm asking a question that everyone else in the room knows the answer to. From what I gather, we're talking most about public sector aspects and measuring carbon footprints and how councils can comply with this. In trying to get the private sector engaged on carbon footprint measurement and reduction, my understanding is, for example, I believe Germany has introduced fairly serious legislation for the private sector to measure their carbon footprint and take steps to start reducing carbon footprint. Does such a similar legislative push exist in Scotland or the wider UK, or is there any discussion to actually start legislating for the private sector to get on board with this sort of activity?
So coincidentally, the recent, within Europe, within the recently completed European directive, one of the articles is about compulsory reporting for businesses. So that's something that will have to be introduced over the next period. That will be across the UK as the member state. But that's only very recently been completed, so the clock started ticking now. But that's something that the government, and we'll be working with the UK government on that to see how that pans out. So yes, but I'm not aware that there's anything at the moment.
Well, the UK government has announced it's going to introduce mandatory carbon reporting for large companies.
The bigger ones.
Yeah.
So that's a first small step, I guess.
And now through their obligation under, or our collective obligation, that will be for all businesses, I think.
So at the moment, most of the carbon footprint measured in this context, we're talking about low carbon cities, it's being done at the public sector level with the expectation that UK government will start implementing legislation to address the private sector aspect.
Well, a lot of large global corporates do it anyway, and are doing it, and I think it would be really interesting to look at those corporates that have a footprint in the Scottish cities and see how because they will be collecting and reporting on this data.
And under the CLC.
Well, under the carbon reduction commitment, any organisation with an energy bill of over $500,000 has to report on its carbon footprint, and that's actually published in a kind of league table.
Although to be strictly accurate, it's reporting on their energy usage rather than their carbon footprint. So there are bits of this jigsaw puzzle floating around, but they're not necessarily all kind of tied up.
I mean, a good source of information there could also be the Carbon Disclosure Project, which has, of course, information on the carbon footprints of many of the major companies around the world, and it's all there on the internet for everyone to see about the climate strategies that they have in place, their Scope 1 and 2 emissions, moving into Scope 3 emissions. It's available there. I think this would be.
But that comes back to the question earlier on. You touched on Scope 3 there, and it's about understanding what the people that you're engaging with in your supply chain, whether you're public sector or private sector, are doing on that front, and that's that is early stages, I think, in terms of understanding.
Okay, we've actually run out of time, and I had 4 other questions to try and get through, so I've clearly failed to get through. However, I think we've maybe covered quite a number of issues, and hopefully you found that useful by way of just updates and information, etc. Can I thank all my panellists for this session, please? I'll ask you to thank them in the usual manner. Okay. And I think it's back to the main
The main
room, main hall.